mode.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to December 21st, the 21st day of Commitmas. Tonight's episode is going to be Git workflows for supporting network devices. Our speaker this evening is going to be Matt Oswalt. He is on Twitter at Mearden.com. His website is http://keepingitclassless.net, and obviously this is vBrownbag. So a couple of meeting notes. Getting on the conversation, always at vBrownbag on Twitter. We're also answering to @Commitmas. So if you have any questions that you want to do over the tweets, feel free. You can see us on #Commitmas, #vBrownbag. All the recorded episodes for Commitmas can be caught up with on bit.ly/Commitmas2, and also at the GitHub repository on github.com/Commitmas/30 days of Commitmas 2015, as opposed to 2014. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Mr. Oswalt and make him the presenter.
Alrighty, let me see if I can make this work.
There you go. I can see your screen. You are good to go, sir.
Good, yeah. My last presentation had 2 monitors, so this one should be pretty simple. Okay. Well, hey, everybody. Let me hide the meeting window. I just wanted to first call out basically that pretty much everything I'm going to be talking about today, I've blogged about. I published sort of at the top of this year. I had a pretty big focus around that time on applying continuous integration concepts to networking. Done a lot of work since then, but a lot of these topics still hold near and dear to my heart, especially some of the concepts behind them. The tools are not as important, and if you're not involved specifically with networking, I'll try to do a good job as possible to sort of bypass all of the lingo, since it's not really the point of this. I guess what I'm trying to communicate in this particular session is what's possible. What are some of the things that software developers, I guess at this point, take for granted that network engineers could make use of? One of those things is continuous integration. So if I may just say, focus on the concepts, not necessarily the tools or the specific applications that I'm using, just more of the workflow and what the value it brings to networking. So if you're interested in reading the post, the URL is here. I can actually provide this as well to the vBrownbag guys. I'll get that in the show notes as well. But I highly recommend you read that. There's actually a nice demonstration video at the very tail end. So if you just want to see this stuff in action, that recording is there. But of course, this video will be published on the vBrownbag channel as well. So definitely those are some resources you can use. So the objective for this particular video, and this is not going to be that long. I, as well as I'm sure a few of you, know that SpaceX is doing a launch in about a half hour. I would love to see that as well. So I will keep this as brief as possible while communicating the value of the idea. So the thing that I want to communicate here is we've got a few tools set up, and if you're not familiar with these tools, that's okay. Just sort of understand what's the value that they're bringing to the table, and you can use them or you can use alternatives to them. The 2 tools that I'm going to be using heavily in this, or I guess there's 3. Garrett is the first one. Now, Garrett is a form of a Git remote. So I'm sure a lot of the presentations up until now for these 30 days of commitment have used GitHub, and that's absolutely fine. GitHub is obviously an extremely popular form of collaborating over open source and closed source, but it's obviously a very popular form of being able to collaborate on the software. Now, it's not the only one. A lot of software projects, OpenStack being one of the most notable, uses Garrett. And Garrett is a way of integrating the review cycle in a different way than GitHub uses. Now, I did a presentation about a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, I think it was, where I demonstrated the use of forking a repository in GitHub and using pull requests to contribute code. Garrett is essentially an alternative to that model. Now, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll use Garrett to sort of front-end GitHub, meaning GitHub sort of turns into a read-only kind of thing where you pull the code from GitHub, but you don't actually push back to it. You actually push into Garrett using a command called git review. Now, of course, all of this is totally up to the project. None of this is required. This is just a different model of contributing. The reason we're using it here is because it provides some really, really neat hooks into some additional software that I'll talk about now. One of those pieces of software is called Jenkins. Now, if you want to stick with GitHub for this, I would highly recommend that you look into something called Travis CI. Travis CI offers a fully in the cloud version of this Really, it's just a way of building your software. Now, we're not writing software in this case. We're actually going to be modifying some source, some configuration files for Ansible in order to do what we're going to be doing. But it's sort of the same thing if you really think about it. This particular tool, Jenkins, we can have these build tasks that run at when certain conditions have been met. For instance, whenever I make a change to my configuration files for Ansible, I have it configured to run this job called network auto /run. And as you can see, it's got a few successful builds in the recent past. What we have this doing is whenever there's a change to the source configuration file, I want to kick off an Ansible job. And that Ansible job is designed to do a very specific thing. That specific thing is something we'll look at here in a second. But really, if you look at the command, all it's doing is running a playbook. So there's a playbook in our repo called junos.yml, and that's designed to do some networky stuff that we'll get to shortly. But in essence, what we're doing on the Jenkins side of things is simply saying, hey, I want to run this command. Ansible then takes it and runs with it. But Jenkins is sort of the glue between our version control, which in our case is Garrett, and the network devices, which in our case are some Juniper routers. And so if you start to piece this together, what we're really doing is we're saying, okay, we no longer need to log into our network devices in order to configure them. What we would really prefer to do is configure them in an automated fashion using a tool like Ansible, and then go a step further and actually say, we're not even using Ansible directly on our laptops. What we prefer to do is to make the changes on our laptops, but push that into version control. And that way those changes can be reviewed before they're pushed into production. And so we're starting to piece together some of the pieces of how software developers use continuous integration to push their code into production. We're using those same methodologies and some of the same tools to make to realize those benefits when pushing configurations into our network devices. So now that we have the two tools in place, I want to show the actual source code. It's not actually code. It's just a bunch of YAML files. So I'll call them configuration files for simplicity, where you have these configuration files just as YAML files that say what we want our network to do. Now, I do want to mention that all of what I'm about to show you, I originally presented at Interop in Vegas earlier this year and are on GitHub as Mirden/NWKauto. I keep this reasonably up to date. It may not yet contain the changes that I've made for this presentation, but you can absolutely take it and download it and run with it. And I've actually provided inside of the directory that we're going to be working on, inside of this Ansible and then Junos directory, I have a Vagrant file in here. So if you really want to get this running on your own lab, all you have to do is go into this directory and run Vagrant up, and it will spin up a 3-node Junos network topology for you to run Ansible against. So this is very repeatable at home. So feel free to fork this if you want and make, submit some pull requests. I'm happy to accept any changes that you think are useful. Okay. So again, I don't want to dive too deep into the specifics of this, especially if you're not involved with networking. But I do again want to focus on the workflow. So I just want to drag your attention down here to the bottom. We have 3 files, and each file sort of represents a very, very brief configuration of our network devices. We have a block in this configuration file that says, I want to advertise this network, 123.123.123.1. But if we go over to that device, VSRX03, you'll notice if we do a show interfaces brief, you'll notice that we actually have a few loopback interfaces. Let's scroll down to that. Maybe it doesn't exist yet. I might not have created it. Let me see if I can just reference it directly. Show interfaces, hello1. Yes, it doesn't exist. So LO1 is, oh, you know what? I was mistaken. I originally thought that I had created a new interface, but what I really did was I just added the address to the existing loopback. But that's okay. This is just an example, so it doesn't need to be specifically correct. So basically what we have here is we have 2 networks on the same loopback address. In reality, I wanted them to be on separate loopback addresses or loopback interfaces, but that doesn't really matter for the example. So what we have in our YAML file is a statement that says, I want to advertise this network, 123.123.123.1/24, which is actually should be .0/24. But the statement does not include the other network. And what we want to do is we actually want to include that. Now, if you're familiar with Junos, if we scroll down, you can actually see where this advertisement is taking place. So if we go to these policy options, you can see that this route filter includes that first network, but it doesn't include the second one. Now, if you feel compelled to dig into this, I'll just sort of help you along and understanding where the actual template is contained. If you go to roles, and you go to router BGP, and you go to templates, and you go to, I believe it is bgp.xml, you can see that we're actually looping through all of the entries in that YAML file to advertise this network. So if you want to modify this for your home, for your own particular instance of this, feel free, but that's where that's coming from. So essentially what's happening is Ansible is looping through all of these entries and saying, I want to create a new snippet for each entry here. So again, forgetting about all the detail, what we really want to do is just simply add a new entry here. 111.111.1/24. So stepping back to the continuous integration part of all of this, we've made a change to our files. Just like a programmer might make a change to the source code, we've made a change to this YAML file. If we go to our main terminal window that is inside this repo, we can do a git status to see that, yes, we have registered that change. We can do a git diff on that directory. And we can see that Git is now aware that that line has been added. I also have a new directory that I haven't added yet, so ignore that. That's actually a work in progress unrelated to the demo. So in order to make this change happen, what we need to do is do what I'm sure you've seen in previous Commitmas episodes, which is a git commit. Actually, first we need to add it to our staging. So we need to do git add. We can add that directory. And I don't want to add that whole directory because that'll actually add this change down here, and I'm not ready for that. So let's get a little more specific and say Junos. One more git status should show us that I can't type. No, that the change that we just made is now in staging, and we are ready to commit. So none of this should all be reviewed. -m, let's add a nice message, something like added new network to BGP advertisement. Okay, and then one thing that is new that you haven't seen, I don't believe, in previous Commitmas episodes is a new way of pushing. Because if you recall, the act of committing is really just a local mechanism. All we're doing is saying, I want to track the change that I've just made in a discrete way. So if we do a git log, just do one line, you can see that we have that top git message. But there's more to it than that. Because we're working with Garrett, Garrett actually requires some additional logic. Now, I want to emphasize this is specific to Garrett. So if you're using GitHub exclusively for your GitHub for your Git remote, none of this applies to you. This only applies if you're using Garrett. Now, I've done a lot of work to set things up. Some of this is in the video that I linked to before, or rather the blog post I linked to before. But you actually don't do a git push when using Garrett. You can. Let me be a little more specific. You can, but it's not the usual way of doing it. Most projects that leverage Garrett will use a Git plugin called Git Review. Now, I've already installed this, and I've already configured this repo to work with Garrett. And if we do a Git log without that one-line argument, you can see that there's some additional logic in the sign-off message. There's actually a change ID here, and that hash might look like a Git hash, but it's not. It's actually separate. This hash is not the same thing as this. And the reason for that is because this is specific to Garrett. Garrett is actually capable of tracking multiple commits in the same change. So that's what we're doing here. Now, of course, that's all done automatically by setting up the repo for working with Garrett. But again, that's already been done for us. I'll pause for questions. Do we have any questions at this point?
Right now, we are good. No.
Okay, cool. So I just want to take a step back and say, again, this is all specific to Garrett, and I probably shouldn't go into this much detail just because it's really not the point. So I just wanted to preface so that when you see these new commands that I'm going to run, Don't think that that's part of your workflow automatically. Just keep in mind this is specific to Garrett. You could be using GitHub exclusively, and then you could use a build service such as Travis CI, which has hooks directly into GitHub, and you wouldn't have to do any of this. I chose this because I'm familiar with Garrett and I'm familiar with Jenkins, and it's something that I can host myself. It's a lot more. It would be a lot more work for me to learn some other tools and implement those myself, and I don't want it to run as a third-party service. I prefer to keep it behind my own firewall, things like that. So very, very totally dependent on your design and what kind of requirements you have. So instead of doing a git push, we're just simply going to do a git review. Again, this is specific to Garrett, so you won't see this if you're just using GitHub. What this is going to do is going to tell Garrett, hey, there's actually a commit here that you don't know about. Let me push it to you. So it actually does do a push in the back end, but it also does a few other things in order to make sure that Garrett is aware of the change and that the review process can go through. So if you can see the output here, this is probably new to those of you who haven't seen Garrett. The Git review tool will show some Garrett-specific things, such as the new changes that are here and a link to that change specifically within Garrett. So there's a link here to Garrett. We could follow that, but I also have a tab open for Garrett. Let's just go straight there. This is Garrett. Let me refresh the page because I'm already at the page that I want to be on. You can see all of the changes that you as the user, or rather me, since I did this change, that I've made, and it's under outgoing reviews. Now, I'm going to cheat a little bit and review my own code, but obviously the value of this tool is so that somebody else can come in and look at your change and provide feedback there. Generally speaking, the way that the tradition is on Garrett is somebody has to provide a +1, or actually multiple people have to provide a +1, and then and only then can somebody provide a +2. A +1 is pretty much just a sort of thumbs up, looks good to me, and then a +2 is a let's actually merge this into the code base and make it part of the production code. So let's just pretend I'm a reviewer looking in here. I would click on this file and see, oh, it looks like you've made a simple change. You've just added a single line. I've verified that this is the right format to us. I can even comment if I wanted to and say, looks good to me. Again, all of this is possible in the PR model for GitHub. This is just a different interface. It's really the only difference. So back to the change. Let's say I've received this review. Another thing that I did not configure for this, but you might also see, is Jenkins could also be used to validate the change before it gets pushed into production. So I don't have this configured yet, but one thing that you could do is configure Jenkins to do two things. One first thing would be to validate that your change is valid. And that sounds kind of, I suppose that sounds kind of cloudy. Let me clarify a little bit. In a traditional, let's just take software development as an example. There are really two things that you want to do in a continuous integration pipeline. The first thing is you want to pass on the code that you change into the next step, which is typically some sort of continuous deployment workflow, which is a little more complicated than just simple CI. But before all of that, you actually have a first step, which is to validate that the change is even is valid. There are a myriad of automated tests that a change might go through in order to even get to a human being. For instance, if you're using a compiled language, you might actually want to compile the code on your Jenkins server to validate that it's actually working code. That's something that's done in an automated fashion within a build server like Jenkins. That's actually why we call it a build server, because that's what it does. It builds our source code. We don't have that second part where we have the first check to see if it's valid. I have not configured that. But if you're doing this in production, I would highly encourage that you do something there. If we use our example like Ansible, you might do something like there's a specific mode within Ansible that you can use that simply imports the YAML, but it doesn't actually run it. That's actually a really powerful thing to do because I, as a human being, might look at the change and say, hey, it looks good to me. But if two humans make that same mistake, then you might be able to push something that's invalid into production, and then your build fails. And maybe even it takes your network down, depending on the type of change that it is. And that's bad. So you absolutely should have some automated checks prior to pushing this into production. For the sake of the example, all I'm doing is I'm pushing it into production. I'm not doing that primary check. So I would highly encourage that you look into that. But the workflow should be the same. It'll just be a different stage of the configuration. So now that we have this code reviewed, and let's just imagine that Jenkins put a message down here for us that says, hey, this looks good to me. I was able to compile this, or maybe specific to Ansible, I was able to run all the commands that you wanted me to run that make sure that this is a valid change. A human being could log in and say, I have put eyes on this, Jenkins has put eyes on this, we are ready to push this into production. The action of doing that is a simple matter of saying +2. Or actually, Garrett has changed recently. I also have to click submit. So I've given a +2, and now submitting says I want to push this into the actual Git repository. And you can see that Garrett pushes a message here that says this has been successfully merged. Now if we go over to Jenkins, you'll notice that there's a task pending, because the way that I've configured Jenkins is to look at Garrett and say, hey Garrett, whenever you have a new merge, which is exactly what we just did, whenever you have a new merge, I want you to run all those commands that I listed before. For instance, running the Ansible playbook. And what that does is it says, okay, I'm actually going to take the changes that you just made, I'm going to merge them first, and then I'm going to take the results, meaning the new version of the repo, and I'm going to run the Ansible playbook against that. We can look at this console output to see exactly what happened behind the scenes. You can see that Ansible goes through all of its steps. This is exactly what we would be seeing if we ran Ansible on our laptop. But again, because we're running it on Jenkins, there is no, hey, it works on my laptop, but not in production. This is the way that the code is deployed. So I prefer to have this because then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if, for instance, Fred is using Ansible version 1.9 and I'm using Ansible version 2.0 and there's just a difference there. What matters is what Jenkins is running. And that sort of simplicity brings a lot of stability to a project. And as you can see, Ansible passed, did everything successfully, but in order to really, really know what happened, let's go back into the command line of our last Junos device. Let's do the same command. Let's show the configuration once more and scroll down to that block we looked at earlier. You can see that because we added that new parameter to the YAML file, that additional network is being advertised into BGP. So just again, I want to focus on the concept and not so much the tools. Garrett, that's great. You could absolutely use traditional GitHub and some sort of cloud build service like Travis CI. The tools really don't matter. What matters is we have automated tests, which again, I apologize, I don't have as part of this example, but that's absolutely something you should look into. And then also code review. That's something that network engineering just simply doesn't do enough of these days, in my experience, is just simple automated review processes, making sure that no matter what the change, we make sure that there's at least one pair of human eyes on that change, in addition to all of the automated stuff. Humans are fallible. You don't simply want to rely on human beings. You have to work with those two things in concert with each other. And this just provides, I think, it provides a lot more stability to our networking configurations, at least, just simply because we're using the same kind of proven methodology that software development has used to push configurations into production more quickly, but also with more stability. So that is the end of my example. Again, if you missed the URL at the beginning, I will go back to that here. Feel free to write that down. I have comments enabled there. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, MIERDIN, Meerden, or on this blog article. This is specifically focused on the example that I gave today. It's just using, I don't believe this is referring to Junos. Yeah, actually, now that I'm looking at it, this is actually focused on deploying DHCP configurations in Linux. But again, the concepts are what is the same. The concepts are, version control, automated testing, build servers, things of that nature. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Happy to answer anything. Did we have any additional questions towards the end?
Nice. Hold on one second. Let me refresh my tweet deck. And we are clean, sir. Job well done.
Okay. Well, I hope job well done. But yeah, again, if you have any other questions, I know it's holiday season and people aren't exactly thinking about Jenkins on the 24th and the 25th. But
what? Of course they are. What are you talking about? This was. I woke up thinking about this morning. I don't know what you're.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, in that case, I shall go ahead and stop recording right now. Thank you all for attending. Again, Mr. Oswalt, a fantastic presentation. And I'm going to stop now, and we can.